Hello, my name is Andrew McLean, the Head Curator of the National Rail Museum, and welcome to Curator with a Camera, which today brings you the Class 142 Pacer. So here we are with the Class 142 Pacer behind us. Now what is it? Is it a bus? Is it a train? Well, it's something in between really. It's a bus train, and it's one of the most infamous trains perhaps of the last 40 years on Britain's railways, but it's also one of the most important too. Now the concept develops of the rail bus. Back in the 1950s, British Rail acquired a couple of rail buses for operation on little used lines. They weren't a success. In 1968, a guy called Charles Sadler Ashby came up with a scheme to put a bus body onto rail wheels.
The train now standing at platform 1, well, it isn't a train, but it is on rails on a recently closed railway line in Hampshire. That's the significance of this Pace Railer, a sleek diesel-powered coach developed by Mr. Charles Ashby.
But at the same time as all that was happening, two major developments were beginning to be put into place. British Railways were creating a new high-speed freight vehicle which was designed to cure the issues of hunting, where wagons would come off the track at speed. While British Leyland were creating a brand new bus with the National Bus Company called the Leyland National. And if you take the body of the Leyland National bus and you stick it on the frame of the high-speed freight vehicle, you basically get the Pacer. Now the first experimental Pacer, the Leyland experimental vehicle, came out in 1978.
This is LEV from British Rail Research. LEV, the Leyland experimental vehicle, combines the best in current bus design with modern railway technology to create a low-cost, self-powered rail bus which could be suitable for many routes.
And that developed in various forms of different types of prototype and experimental vehicle to something called the Class 140 two-car Pacer train. And that's the forerunner of what we see behind us today. The Pacers were built between 1985 and 1987. 96 of them operated in the north of England for much of their careers, although it did find a way down to the southwest as well. So we're going to have a bit of a look to see what makes the Pacer tick, what makes it special. So here we are standing in front of the Pacer here. Class 142, this is 142001. You can see the number there just above the lights. And that's the first of the Class 142s. Now, they were the next development on from the Class 141 Pacer, which hadn't been a great success. It was launched in Yorkshire just before this. Now, it doesn't look so much like a bus here because it had to be redesigned with a train front. So instead of the big windscreen that you see on the bus, the Leyland National bus, you see actually there's 3 windscreens here on the 142. And that's very much down to safety. At the time, British Rail and the unions were very worried about vandalism and people throwing things like bricks and stones at windscreens of trains. So the smaller windows actually help the safety for that. As we come down, you'll see some other interesting things here. We have the automatic coupler. Now that coupler there enables this Pacer to be connected to other Pacers or other trains of similar style. Now the Pacer was the first of a group of trains called the Sprinters. You had the Pacer, you had the Sprinter, the Super Sprinter, then the Express Sprinter. So very much with an athletic theme. Seems quite ironic given that the Pacer itself is a very, very basic and perhaps one of the most unathletic of British Railway train designs. Now we're going to move round now from the cab, just have a little look at the Pacer body itself. And this is where it becomes much more bus-like. You'll see there the twin leaf folding doors, very much taken from the Leyland National bus, and of course the windows as well, which are very, very similar. So the body shell was built at Leyland's Lily Hall Works at Workington in Cumberland. That's where the Leyland National bus was constructed, but the bus body isn't the exact body that was used on this particular train. It's slightly wider and it's been adapted. It's got the train cab rather than a bus cab. And down here we'll see there's a little sticker here. It says, you can see that, NH the Newton Heath. Now that's the depot in Manchester where this train was allocated from service in 1985. Now Newton Heath's a very famous depot. In 1878 the local football team, the Works football team, was founded, and that went on to become Manchester United. And the famous railway engineer Sir Nigel Gresley also began his career with the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway at that depot too. So it's got a very distinguished lineage. Now, as we come round, you'll see the doors open buttons and the ways in which we can get into the Pacer, which we'll have a look at later on. But we're going to look at the base here because this is very, very similar to the high-speed freight vehicle which was developed at the Derby Research Technical Centre of British Railways in the 1960s. And these were tested on rolling rigs, which meant they could get to speeds in excess of 120 miles per hour. Although the imagination of having a Pacer running at that speed, really can't quite imagine. They were restricted to 75. No traditional bogies, and that's one of the problems and one of the things that makes a feature of the Pacer so distinguished. You've got the coil springs here, and because there was no bogies, because these the wheels are just this driving axles attached to the frame directly, you get that incredible squealing noise that the Pacers were notorious for. And also the bouncing ride as well. Now the bouncing ride meant that the cab would be bouncing up and down when you'd see it on particular tracks, and that gave it a nickname of the nodding donkey. So you'll see diesel, so you've got the fuel here, and actually a fuel gauge down here. Still quite a lot of fuel in here, not quite half a tank there, but certainly still fuel in it. This is still an operational vehicle. Come around with radiator grills and so on. The engine down here in the middle. Originally a Leyland bus engine. These were later re-engineered in the 1990s, so the Leyland engine was replaced by the slightly more powerful Cummins engine. Riveted body side here, give it a bit of a tap. Mainly steel, but also some aluminium plastics also used on the inside of these, but largely a steel body, and that's one of the things that made the Pacer so distinguished and so economical. So these units cost £340,000 to make, which is about a third of the cost of producing a more traditional train. And that was very important, part of the reason, a major part of the reason why the Pacer of course came into being. And here we have, this tells you a little bit about this particular unit. It's a 142 because it's a class 142. DMS stands for driving motor second. It's got a driving car, the cab at one end, second class, standard class as we call that now. Pacer had no first class of course. Then the weight, this one's 24 tonnes, the length 15.5 metres, width 2.80 metres. And in this particular carriage there's 55 seats, 52 in the carriage adjoining it. Now the Pacer that we see today is in the Northern livery that it last ran in. It came out of service in 2019, so the purple livery of Northern. But when they first came into service, these were painted in the Greater Manchester Passenger Executive livery of orange and black. But very much in the later years livery, the Pacer with the swoosh gives a sort of sense of things being a little bit faster than they actually were. And then we're going to move around to the other side of this Class 142 Pacer, because we're now going to go through the bus doors and see what it's like on the inside. So to get into the Pacer, first of all, we need to open this box with this key. So it's a bit tough, but there we go. Very, very basic. Everything about the Pacer is basic. Now I need to pull this handle quite hard, this lever. That should have released the doors. And then we move over to the door itself, because the door hasn't itself opened, as you'll see. But you'll see this little ingenious cutout here. If I push here, there we go, the door's open. And for us to get in, we're going to have to climb up these steps and explore the inside. Now we're going to have a little look at some of the details as we go through. Now first of all, we've looked at one set of doors. Let's just look at the other, because how do you get out of the train? Again, I'm not going to get out here, but I'll just explain how that happens. The magic key again, and then you'll see that releases this door here, which has the various buttons for the guard for door release. Local just means that when the train's at the station, the guard gets off through one door, checks that everything is safe and clear, and then can do the double door release to get people off the train. So very basic. That just shuts down. We'll take the key back out. These trains, believe it or not, were taking passengers to destinations such as Manchester Airport, so you can imagine lots of luggage requirements for some of the passengers. And yet, that's one of the first things that strikes you, the luggage space. Look at the luggage rack here. It's made of plastic. Runs along one side of the carriage, but nothing on this side. I've never quite understood why that was. But up here on the roof, we've got these grills, and that's the heating. Comes through these grills in the roof. There's a pod on top of the vehicle, and that's very, very similar to what you had on the Leyland National Bus. That's where the heating was kept, in a pod up on the roof. And it'll come down, classic bus windows as well. Look, it's quite warm today, so let's get a window open. Maybe let's get a couple open actually, why not? Because one of the joys of the Pacer was getting fresh air into it. But one big difference between the Pacer and the Leyland National Bus is the seating configuration. Same types of seats, but on this side you've got seats for 2 people. On this side, got wider seats, seats for 3 people. Now on the bus it was only 2 and 2, but because it's a slightly wider body shell here on the Pacer, you can get an extra row of seats in. In fact, some of the seats actually face one another, quite good if you're in a large group. We've still got an Everton sticker here from when it was in use. There we go, Everton fans might recognise that. One of the things I've always found rather amusing about the Pacer, many things, but this is one of them, the emergency ladder, which is over here. It's made of wood. You know, this idea of a modern railway using wooden ladders. And what marks this vehicle here out is this isn't a driving motor second, this is a DMS L. So the L stands for lavatory because there's actually a toilet in this particular half of the Pacer. Now, not all British Railway trains had toilets at the time, so that was one thing that was in the favour of the Pacer. And you'll see here the classic British Rail vacant sign. And let's go inside. Door opens inwards. Very narrow here, so this is where the GoPro comes in handy. British Rail mirror. The frosted window here, complete with this wonderful peephole, which you can just see through. That's in case you're at the station and you don't realise that the trains have pulled into the station. You can just check just to make sure that it's not the station you're trying to get off at, which doesn't give you much time, but at least it gives you something to do. If I pull back, it's very, very hard to get any sort of view here, but even signs in 3 different languages there, which is quite interesting. Trying to cater for different audiences here. So that's the lavatory, which is why that's a DMSL rather than a DMS. And we're just about to go in the DMS because here we're going to go across the aisle between the two and into the other half of the unit. Again, another set of doors here on one side, but not on this side. Always confusing depending on what platform you were at. Sometimes you'd see people looking for the door and realising that they had to go to the either end. So that was one issue. And of course, this still has a lot of its original signage from when it was last in service, about how you open the doors, about how you use the bins, the safety information. Nolan advert still there from when it was in service. And the trains were run by Arriva. And then, of course, the See It Sorted, takes the British Transport Police. So it shows that this train was in service till quite recently. 2019, this particular one came out of service, but the very last Pacer came out in 2021. That was in Wales, that was a class 143, not a 142. So, we're now going to go into the cab. And for that, I once again need the magic key. And for down here, the cab door. Opens a lot easier than the outside doors, I have to say. And here we go in to the cab itself. The 3 windows that we looked at, one on the right hand side here, centre window. Each window's got its own blind, and then the driver's position here. Complete that fan, we could do with that on just now because it's very, very warm. The windows, cab controls, and the driver's seat, which I'm going to attempt to squeeze into in a moment. You can see it's very, very cramped in here. Not the easiest cab to work in, and I know they were unpopular with drivers when they first came out. And you'll see the seat as well, remarkably short bottom to this seat, as it were, particularly when you've got a large bottom like me. I'm going to squeeze onto that, but actually that's deliberate, so you can squeeze in, because when you sit down you can push the seat forward your backside and you've got a much better position to drive from, and then you have a clear view ahead. And we're going to look at the controls here. Very, very simple. Everything about the Pacer is simple. But here we have the main controls. This is the brake. Here we go. On this side. And as we move across, you'll see here the power, the gears going through on the right hand side here. There's also a little lever just up here on the left hand side of the power, and that's actually the horn. So a couple of toots on that gives a distinctive beep beep noise. In the middle, you have the air pressure on the left hand side, various reasons for that. But the speedometer, you'll see it does say 100 miles per hour there, but actually the pacers could only do 75. Various other buttons and buzzers here that you see, and also this telephone as well. What's that all about? Well, that's actually the public address system. So not to forget that this isn't just a driver's cab, this would also be the guard's compartment for when this was the reverse of the train. So you could do the public address, so press this and do the announcements about where the train was stopping, or when the train was going to come into a station, or to do any of those announcements you always get in the train. The call button to do more internal calls between the two members of the crew. Push that back on there. Also you'll see various things here about brakes and train overrides, the safety things, and the modern GSMR. That's a global safety management system for railways. So this is for communication using this telephone connector here, and that's for telephone communication with signallers as well if there's any problems on the tracks. And to do that, and I don't think you can quite see this, but down below, but if I go right down here, this is a dead man's pedal, as it was called, a dead man's handle, the driver safety device, which would make sure that the driver was awake and doing what it had to do, wasn't ill, otherwise the train would stop automatically. So that's a safety device that you get on the train to make sure that the clear road ahead, that the train operates safely at all times. So we're going to move on now. As I stand up there, the seat springs back into position. You'll see there, it's on a spring load. So as we come round, see all sorts of controls for saloon lights. That's the lights for inside the train. Switch them on and off, various things for the guard to do, fire extinguisher, and these track circuit clips for if the train was to break down, you can put these onto the track and circuit the signal so it goes to red, or another safety mechanism. So that's us almost finished with exploring the cab, but of course the pacer ran to many different destinations, and how would you know if you're on the right train? Well, here is the destination panel board. So this one says Manchester Victoria. Now this would have been put back in 2011 when this particular unit came back from its sojourn down in the southwest where it served for a few years. But Manchester Victoria was a destination, the very last 142 pacer back in 2020, a journey from Kirby to Victoria, and that was 142004. And then you've got different stations, so we're going through the Ems here. Marple, very, very famous station, because one of the passengers used to go through Marple was a woman who was going to visit relatives in that part of the country. Her name was Agatha Christie. That's how she got the name for the Miss Marple character. It's a true story, that. They've got stations all the way through from Bishop Auckland to York there, because that covers the areas in which the pacers would operate. A huge part of the north of England for these particular units, but other parts of the country too. Let's face it, the pacer was never the most popular of trains. People tended to loathe them rather than love them. However, they were a very important part of British Railway's story over the last 40 years. It was economical, it was cheap, it was easy to maintain, and that was vital at a time when Britain's Railways finances were quite low. And so while it might not be as revolutionary as Robert Stephenson's rocket, or as grand, stylish and as fast as the legendary Mallard, but it is an incredibly important vehicle. It tells a story of the everyday life of railway and railway passengers over the last 40 years in this country, and as such it deserves its place in the national collection with all those other icons. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this edition of Curator with a Camera. If you have, please do like and subscribe. And come back next week as well for a special bonus edition, because we'll have a special film about the Leyland National Bus, the bus that inspired the pacer.